Well, at this point, what we need to start looking at is how we can code the footer. If we come back to Photoshop for just a minute, we can see that the footer is fairly straightforward. We're going to go ahead and create a main container element, a div element, that's going to have an ID of footer. This element can fill the gray background that you see here inside of Photoshop. What we can then do is create a new div element using the content class that's going to add the necessary space around the footer. We can also use the footer ID selector to create the thicker border that you see up here towards the top. So what we want to do is go ahead and create the necessary HTML structure in order for us to do that. So let's come back into our HTML editors. In this case, it's Dreamweaver. And what we want to do is stay inside the page div element, but we want to make sure that we're outside of the blog div section. So let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit until we find the closing div element for the blog ID, which is right here. You'll notice that there's two closing div tags because we have a nested div element that has the class article assigned to it. So with that selected, you can go ahead and collapse it. Again, you don't have to do this. If your code editor doesn't have this collapsing capability, it's not a big deal. The only reason why I'm doing it is to make the document a little bit cleaner and a little bit easier for you to read. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse that. And when I do, what I want to do is open up a new div element. We're going to give this div element an ID of footer. So go ahead and type that in. Then, of course, you can close that element, and inside of it, like I said, we're going to create one more div container that uses the content class. So go ahead and type that in. Of course, the only other thing that we need is the structure to produce all of the links. Now, if we take a look at the PSD file, you can see that we have what's going to be a heading element, and then we'll have 3 links under each of these sections. So the HTML is fairly straightforward in that. You can imagine it'll take a little bit of time to reproduce all of that. So fortunately for you, I've already created the HTML, and all I want you to do is copy and paste it. So come up to the File menu, and under the File menu, you can choose Open. What I'd like you to do is navigate to the blank directory. You'll notice that I'm inside the PSD to HTML folder. Inside the blank directory is the Includes folder, and you'll notice that there's a folder called Typing Help. Go ahead and open that, and you'll notice that there's a file called footeritems.html. Go ahead and open that, and here's the HTML that you need to place within that content div tag. So a couple things that are going on. We're using the UL element, and it has a class of no style attached to it. We've already worked with no style in a previous movie. It's part of the F2FW framework. Then you'll notice that we have an H6 element, and then we have the 3 list elements. But inside those list elements, we have paragraph elements followed by anchor elements. So it's fairly straightforward. What I'd like you to do is select all of it, Control A on Windows machine, it would be Command A on a Macintosh, and then copy it, Control C or Command C. Come back to index.html and paste that code, Command V on the Mac, Control V on Windows. And you'll notice, of course, we also have this one div element down here, which is going to clear any floats or anything that we have applied to these list elements in terms of how we want to position this content. So that should do it for the HTML file. What we want to do next is come over to style.css, and inside of style.css, we want to create the footer ID selector. And inside this ID selector, what we want to do is set a border-top property. And we want to set that to 3 pixels. Of course, it's going to be solid based upon what we were looking at inside of Photoshop. And the color is going to be a hex code, which is going to be CD, 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 which is that steel gray type color. After that, what we want to do is set the background color. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and set background. This, of course, will be a hex value as well, which will be EF, 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 which is a lighter steel gray color. And then what we want to do is we want to add a little bit of padding, and we're going to assign that to the div element based upon the content class. So again, we're going to go ahead and type in the footer ID div.content. And after that, what we want to do is just assign a padding property a value of 25 pixels. So let's go ahead and save the style.css file. Make sure index.html is saved. If it is, go ahead and take a look at it in your WebKit-based browser like Chrome or Safari. And when you scroll down, you should see the footer in place. Of course, it doesn't look the way that we want it to look in terms of the content being positioned horizontally. That's something that we'll address in the next movie.